be using a lot more stories when we talk to people about the truth of Christianity. We're living in an age called postmodern age, and people love stories more so than they love logic. And so we can clear up any misconceptions they have about Christianity and let them know what Christianity really means through the use of stories. Stories grab us. They give us an emotional connection as well as a logical connection to the truth. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about and stories that you might consider developing. Let's talk about the introduction to apologetics issue. How should you get across apologetic truths to people? Well, here's an example. In 1 Peter, it talks about us always needing to be ready to give an answer. So if I'm talking to a class about this, I'll tell them my story. So one time I was at a doctor's office, and I'd finished with the doctor, and he was getting ready to head off someplace else, and he knew that I'd retired. So he says, "What are you doing with your retirement?" And I said, thinking to myself, here goes nothing. I said, "Well, I'm speaking. I'm going to different churches and talking about issues of apologetics, about the truth of Christianity." So I expected him just to grab his stuff and just head out the door and be done with me. But instead, he put everything down, and he sat down next to me. He said, "Really?" He said, "I'm interested in that. Tell me about that." And then he started telling me about his view of things, and they weren't exactly Christian views, but that was fine. He grew up Catholic, and he had a different conception of things, and he kind of wandered off the reservation. So we started talking about that. Well, I never thought I was going to get into a conversation in that area, but we're supposed to always be ready. And so I think that story illustrates the truth that Peter was talking about. What about the existence of God? What's one argument that you can make? Well, that this universe is finely tuned for life on Earth. Well, that's fine, but what about a story? So you say something like this. Imagine that you have reserved a place in Yosemite, a cabin, and you go up there with your family, and you walk in the door, and all your kids' favorite toys are on the floor. And you say, "Well, that's odd." And you go in the kitchen and open a cabinet, and all your favorite cereals, all your favorite food is there. You open the refrigerator, all the drinks that you and your wife and the kids love are sitting there on the shelf getting cold. Whoa. You go in the bathroom and open up the cabinet, and there's the toothpaste you like, the deodorant you like. Everything is there that would be perfect for you. What kind of assumption can you make? That somebody knew you were coming and dialed it all in to be exactly right for you. That's what we discover on Earth. But you see how that story has the power, because it gives us a mental picture of what that is talking about when we say the Earth appears to be finely tuned. What about the uniqueness of Jesus? Is there something we can say about that? Sure. Jesus said some things that were just outrageous for people of his day, especially talking to a Jewish audience. Okay, yeah, we can say that, but what if we illustrate, say, think about your pastor. Okay, so they get a picture of the pastor. Imagine some Sunday morning he walks in front of the congregation and he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." Can you imagine how quiet it would have gotten, or people would have been turning around? Be a lot of uncomfortable looks. People would say, "He's lost it. This is not good. We've got to get him some help." But Jesus said all sorts of outrageous things, but tell it in a story format. And imagine that your pastor's the one saying those things. Here's one more story. So what if you're talking about manuscript evidence for the truth of Christianity? And you say, well, it's good to have a lot of manuscripts, because then we can check them out against each other to see what the original documents really said. So people go, all right, I get it. But what if you tell them this story? Well, I've got this dear elderly aunt who had the most wonderful pumpkin pie. And people said, "Oh, can we get your recipe?" And so she sat down in her frail handwriting and wrote out copies here and copies there and mailed some and sent some to friends. And she did about 15 to 20 copies. And then she passed away. And people, when they got together for the funeral, said, "Oh, I brought the recipe, did you?" And they all sat down and they compared them, make sure they had the right information. Well, let's say one of the recipes said teaspoon, and all the other recipes said tablespoon. What do you think is more accurate? Probably the tablespoon. And she just miswrote it when she was doing it in kind of a hurry. Well, that's the same principle when it comes to manuscripts in the New Testament. So these are stories that you can think about, you can use, but have your own stories, especially when you talk about why Jesus Christ means everything to you and how he's changed your life and the answers to prayer, miracles you've seen or you've read about. Be sure you have those locked away that you can talk to other people and share with them. There's a good book out there that discusses what we're talking about, the conversation orientation toward Christianity, having stories ready. It's called The God Conversation by J.P. Moreland. I know you'd like it.